Welcome to our live weekly broadcasts where we share some tea together, have a little discussion about some philosophy and life wisdom, some guidance and directions, cha dao, all things tea. Ordinarily, we can use these broadcasts to talk about every aspect of tea, from the geeky details to the philosophical / spiritual cultivation aspects of a tea practice. I'm open to talking about everything. However, during this coronavirus lockdown, as we all sit inside and as a tremendous amount of people around the world are dealing with grief and or suffering, I feel like it's imperative that we keep these discussions more to life wisdom and use this time as a reminder of what's important to us as individuals and as a society. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to keep the discussion a little bit more on the life wisdom side and a little less on the tea geek side, but very soon we'll return to those questions too and have a healthy balance of heaven and earth. As we say in Zen, gaze at the stars, but walk on the earth. So we're going to start with some quiet tea together. I hope you all have some wonderful tea to drink, that you're somewhere safe and comfortable, and you can enjoy tea together with those of us around the world who are sitting in this space, connected virtually through cameras and computers to each other's space, even from far away. It's a beautiful way to connect in this way when we cannot connect in person. So I invite you to brew some tea along with me and share this time in quiet, have some peace. So that was very nice once again. Have a little time to connect digitally and drink some tea. I'd like to continue the discussion on some of the themes that we've been talking about over the past few weeks in these broadcasts. And today introduce a very similar topic / teaching. Before I do, I've been saying at the end of these broadcasts, but today I would like to say it at the beginning. I'd like to remind you that to me, and teachings are not philosophical stances. My aim is not to say you should do like this, you should think like this, or worse, to say this is the way things are. So these aren't arguments. They aren't theories on the nature of reality or prescriptions for behavior. To me, teachings are invitations to explore. They are invitations to question, to wonder, to what happens when I think like this? Hey, what happens when I think like that? And what questions arise? And how can I apply that to my situation and my way of life? And is that applicable, or is that just philosophy? And if it's just philosophy, is it resonate with me? Does it bring it truth? Does it open up questions and areas of exploration that lead me to go study and learn? This is what teachings represent to me. And I would argue that since I'm the one giving the teachings, my intentions matter. Though in the end you are free to interpret these as philosophical stances / arguments. They aren't. They're just discussions meant to be invitations to explore, to open questions, not to give answers. So, with that, we can start our discussion, continuing on some of the themes that we have been discussing over the last few weeks. I would like today to discuss what is actually an ancient Taoist concept that also very much applies to Zen and to tea, and is the idea of flooding the arena of the Tao. This is a very important kind of slogan. You could, if it were to be a slogan, though, it would have to be like one should not, or do not, or avoid flooding the arena of the Tao. So let us understand and unpack this idea of flooding the arena of the Tao. Let's start with nature, and then we'll, of course, apply it to the individual as well. Most indigenous societies, most nature-centric societies that lived more in tune with nature. We tend to say a part of nature, but we're not separate from nature now. But they certainly felt more a part of nature. They were more in tune. Most indigenous societies, they structured their villages so that there was village space, and they continue to do if they're still living this way, but few are. So there's the village space, the human realm, and then around the village there's a kind of intermediary zone that's part wild, part nature, and part human. And then beyond that is the wild, the nature domain. And have a lot of taboos against encroaching upon the wild part, the nature part. And in some of these indigenous cultures, they even refrain from going into there unless absolutely necessary. And so there's taboos. In the late 90s, I lived for a few months with an Aboriginal tribe in Yunnan to learn about pu'er that was very much still living the old ways, wearing traditional clothes, very few modern products, etc. And they had these same kinds of taboos. Now let's contrast that to the modern society and what is essentially a Judeo-Christian view of nature that has so influenced Western culture and continues to do so. Because in these philosophies, in these cultures, nature is something cruel and evil. And so it is the human role to subjugate, dominate, correct nature, fix it. And if we don't do so, we don't have a chance at happiness. So nature is to be encroached upon, to be leveled, to be dug up, to be reconstituted and reformed into concrete, into cement bricks, into et cetera, into living spaces that don't have plants that are recycling the carbon dioxide. And therefore, when you go from them to a forest, the first thing that you notice is, wow, the air is different, et cetera, right? So, not leaving nature its wild space, assuming that the world needs human intention to fix it. Right? This is a more collective version of flooding the arena of the Tao. When you apply this to the individual, to myself and my practice, egoically, the ego is a lot like that Western civilization. It wants to fix things. It wants to set things straight. It likes solutions that are linear, that are aligned, that are quick and efficient, and solve, and that are fix-all problems. Like the ego loves to offer solutions that are fix-alls, so that everything will be solved if we just do, right? It doesn't like the slow, gradual, unconscious, unintentional, zigzag flow of nature. And nature doesn't have intentions. And yet, if you stand back and look at it, it looks as though it was following some grand, perfect cosmic plan. But it finds its perfection through giving complete freedom. In other words, having no intention, having no purpose, allowing everything its freedom to be. All those things find their places. They are able to do so because they have the freedom to do so, and they have the time to do so. So over a long period of time, all the organisms in the ecology all find their niches and all balance and work and flow in and out of each other in this way that's, wow, it's so perfect when you stand back. And then the human mind wants to posit onto it a watchmaker who put all that together, when actually it put itself together through freedom. It put itself together because it didn't have any intentions. It was unintentional. It is perfect, but it's perfect because it had billions of years. So it had slow, gradual time, and it had freedom of movement, openness. Yeah. So again, bringing this back to the self, we flood the arena of the Tao is not leaving that wild space, wanting to conquer all. I read a scientific report. I do not know whether or not it is completely accurate, because what I read was a more mainstream summary of a scientific study, and you have to be careful with such things. But the idea is, if anything, it's quite amazing and suggested many questions to me. But basically it was a study where they were saying that the poles are moving in a way that they never have before. And they couldn't figure out what was causing this to happen. And quickly. They're saying even in the next 100 years there could be a big shift. And basically, after some research, they found that, anyway, this article suggested they found, again, I don't know about the veracity, we'd have to more check into it, but it does suggest some powerful ideas. They said that what's actually causing this, they figured out, was India and China. India is, because of the overpopulation in India and China, India is sucking up so much water from the earth, from the ground, and China is paving so much of the earth in cement that the amount of water that's being taken out of India and the amount of cement that is covering that half of the earth is literally knocking the earth's gravitational pulls off. Is that strong, right? That's what I mean about not leaving the wild space. Assuming that the answer is, and our answer is always to fix it. Oh, we'll just find a way to fix that. But then the way that we fix that causes more problems. And we just keep going down that road. When really, if you want a parking lot to return to a forest so the Earth's gravitational pull isn't being knocked off by India taking too much water and China using too much concrete, you just stop adding concrete and the Earth will actually even break that concrete up over a long enough time. It has a lot of time and it has no intentions. It is unconscious. So on a personal level, flooding the arena of the Tao is not having the space for nature to work things out for you. So we flood the arena of the Tao with three things. We flood the arena of the Tao with fear and doubt. And we flood the arena of the Tao with ambitions and intentions. And we flood the arena of the Tao with vacillation, like worry and anxiety. So doubt, fear, and too much ambition, they often go together. When you're afraid that I will be cheated of my happiness if I don't do something, right? If I don't do something, nobody will, I have to do it for myself or nobody will do it. That fear usually goes with the ambition, the intention. But too much fear, ambition, anxiety, and you flood the arena of the Tao means the Tao becomes a swamp. It no longer has room to work in your life. Nature no longer has room to work things out. Often because you're impatient. Again, nature is slow and gradual, it changes. Or you're not comfortable with its lack of intention. The fact that it moves zigzag and yet finds its way. Right? And the Taoist Zen master never floods the arena of the Tao. So like Winnie the Pooh, right? He's the he's the paragon. He's the epitome of a Taoist sage. There's literally a book, The Tao of Pooh. It's wonderful. Unintentionally. The author did not intend that, but it is thus. Because wherever he goes, he doesn't have a clue. And yet wherever he goes, everything works out. Everything works itself out in a magical way. Another example of this is the Kung Fu Panda. His martial arts is he doesn't have intention. He just and bounces and flops, and yet somehow he bounces and flops and lands, and it all works out. Nature always works itself out over time. Given enough time, every problem you have now and every problem you ever will have will be worked out. They will be unwound. However, the solution is not, this is not suggesting, even though those are humorous examples like the Kung Fu Panda, this isn't suggesting a kind of zombie state where you just become completely passive. Actually, when you flood the arena of the Tao, action often is not successful either, because in order for action to be easy, which is the yang is easy, the yin is simple, right? So in order for the creative to be successful, it has to have clarity and it has to lack vacillation, right? It has to be direct, it has to be self-confident, it has to be held, it has to be complete, with no remainder, done with the whole self, right? So when the arena of the Tao is flooded, there's often also, as a byproduct of that, a lack of clarity and multiple voices and a vacillation and a conflict of motives. And then the action is not empowered in a way that would make it easy and direct. Whereas when you leave the arena of the Tao, its space, you also then develop a clarity for where, when, how, and how hard to act. In other words, because you leave space for nature to work itself out in your life, because you leave space for God or the divine or whatever you want to say, because you leave space for things to work themselves out, that means you don't encroach on the arena of the Tao. You don't encroach on other people's space either, because our intentions and our fear and doubt and anxiety often encroach on other people's process and other people's space and don't give them the freedom to work their stuff out in their time. We want them to work out their stuff today, tomorrow. And why can't they just see that they need to, I don't know, leave their boyfriend? And we want that to happen now. And not let them work it out. So we encroach upon nature, we encroach upon the holy in nature, and we call that Tao, and we encroach upon others. And when you stop doing that, and you give the Tao its arena, it also will result in clarity. And that clarity will, over time, result in direct, meaningful, purposeful, very intentional, laser-focused efforts that will be far more efficacious. They will have a much stronger impact because they are pressed at the right pressure points at the right time and to the right degree. Over pushing or under pushing, no good. So no vacillation, knowing how hard to push and where, will be a byproduct of also allowing the Tao to have its arena. So don't flood the arena of the Tao. We flood it again with fear and doubt, right? And with intention and ambition and anxiety and worry. Usually they all go together. When we have fear and doubts, then we start cultivating intentions and ambitions of how we're going to fix things, and we start encroaching upon the mystery, the divine, whatever you want to call it. You can make this more personal and say, like, the angels, the helpers, whatever you want to, I don't really personally resonate so much with that language, but I'm okay with it. Whatever you want to say, the forces that work things out, be they natural or be they supernatural. I don't even like that word, supernatural. I don't know. Mystery is fine for me, but the way that things unfold and work in nature, and we often don't like that because it is a kind of unconscious force. It's an unconscious, unintentional, maybe you could say chaotic, stochastic field. But things do work themselves out there. And so it's not about not having a village. Certainly have the human and the human mind and the reason and the intentions and the ambitions in the human realm, but it's about leaving nature its arena. And that means in your life too, leave the arena of the mystery to itself, and it will work things out in ways that you can't work things out because you don't have the infinite connections that it has. You're not as dialed in. And so what you might call a failure, what I have in my life called a failure at the time, turned out to be a very essential shift that opened up new doors, that created a new way of life that now, years later, I couldn't live without. So you apply for a job and you put all your energy into it and all your hope and you want it so bad and you pray and then you don't get it. And then as a result, you move to New York where you meet your future wife and also get a different job that turns out to be the job where you meet your Buddhist teacher and start a Buddhist practice, and through that meet tea, and through that and wow, that so-called failure of not getting that job opened up all these doorways for me that have become so essential for the unfolding of my character and person. And if you would just learn to stop flooding the arena of the Tao, more of that would be allowed. Also, your attitude and relationship to the changes in life would start to shift and be more in harmony and aligned and wise. So that's our talk for today. Let's move on to whatever questions we have. Hopefully that inspires you to ask some questions and think and ponder and apply.
So a question from the app. Last week you spoke about the easy route and it not being a path for spiritual growth. But what about Wu Wei? How does one decipher between the two? Can you please discuss the path of least resistance in regards to insight and aligning with the Tao?
So last time I said that one criteria for making navigational decisions in my life is not the only criteria. It's not like I use this solely to base all my navigation on. It's not so. But amongst the questions that I do ask when I have a decision to make is this the easy way? And we were talking about that in the context of listening to the different voices inside of us, because we all have inferior and superior influences inside of us, and learning to distinguish which are inferior influences and which are the higher voices. And I said that the inferior voices are often looking for the easy way, the comfortable way. So the question is to relate that discussion to the concept of effortless effort, or Wu Wei, which is not really translatable, which is the path of least resistance. And these two concepts are actually not mutually exclusive and not really related at all. The path of least resistance of Wu Wei is also, at its essence, it is not a path of avoidance of obstacle or avoidance of challenge. Wu Wei is first of all, an attitude, a heart mind. And then from that heart mind, action. So a state of mind that results in action. It is a state of mind that results in action. It is a way of responding to challenges, not a way of avoiding them. So if you think of this in terms of the analogy of water flowing downhill, the water is not like, oh no, a rock, I better go some other easier way. It is instead meeting the rock, but meeting the rock openly and fluidly. As I was just talking about, giving the Tao its arena. So it's meeting the challenges of the road in a way where you realize that, you know, as I just said, that failures aren't failures, that the obstacles in the path are the path. And so the opposition is actually the metal, the test, the strength, that which evolves character, that which sharpens, hones. And so it is the way in which you come against that hard surface Wu Wei. It's not the avoidance of it, right? So that's a misunderstanding that is very common in Western meets Eastern thought. When the Zen masters first started coming to the West, to California, there was also the booming hippie movement. And so you would have these students, I'm making this up, but these are just, you know, hypothetical situations, but they make my point. You would have these students who would come into the, you know, Zendo and say, Master, I can't stop eating burgers. And the Zen teacher would say, yes, then Zen of eating burgers. And then they would come into the next day and be like, I can't come to meditation tonight. There's a free Jefferson Airplane concert in the park. I'm going to that. And the dude would be like, yes, Zen of concerts. And on like that, it would go. And there became this idea that like, that Zen or that Wu Wei was like being a hippie, like living in a mess. And just letting a mess be. And it's a complete misunderstanding of this attitude and the expression that results from having this state, living in this state of mind. It's not a state of mind of messiness and avoidance. It's an Aikido that is loose and open and responsive to the challenges as they come. The Zen master is saying, basically, in that answer, yes, what the Zen master is saying is that if one finds oneself in the reality of eating a burger, then Zen of that. Zen is not about trying to be a certain way. Zen is not about the content. Zen is not about the what you do. It is about the how you do what you do. So in other words, it's, are you awake, right? So there's a lot of Zen dialogues, famous ones, where somebody asks the Zen teacher, what is the essence of Zen? And the teacher says, like, when you're hungry, you eat. When you're tired, you sleep. And then the student will say, but that's what everybody does. And the Zen master will be like, no, you do that, I'll call you master. Right? So Yunman has a famous saying, which is like, when you stand, stand. When you sit, sit. But don't wobble. So when you're sitting, don't wobble. When you're walking around making potatoes, don't wobble. So Zen is about whatever reality you find yourself in, you're fully that. Whoever you are, your body, you're fully that yourself. And wherever you are and what you're doing, you're fully that activity. Not with something on top of it, some kind of new age like power of now or whatever, that you're trying to add to the moment, but just the moment, right? Fully, completely. As Ellen Watts says, right? In Christianity, they're trying to peel potatoes while they think of God. In some spiritual movements, they're trying to peel potatoes while they like breathe and chant mantras. In Zen, we just peel potatoes, right? So what the teacher was saying was, if you find yourself in a concert, then Zen of being in a concert. If you find yourself eating a burger, then Zen of eating a burger. But that Zen teacher is not going to be eating a burger that night and not going to be missing meditation to go to a concert. The difference, I think, this is a cultural difference. You see, in the Eastern culture, that let's rewind to that time because I think it clarifies this issue, which is very subtle and difficult to understand. But at that time, let's say 50s and 60s or earlier, that Japanese Zen teacher is coming from a culture where everything is very, very, very disciplined. What we would call too much rigorous formality. Who sits where at the dinner table, what language you use when you're meeting someone above you or below you, how you pass the food, where your chopsticks are, sitting up. Every area of life was highly disciplined, right? And so their philosophy had no need to talk about anything other than the freedom. But what we're talking about here, you see, is the Western misunderstanding that is constant. I had it. It took me decades to realize and penetrate this truth. Where you see, in the West, we want the freedom without the form. But freedom without form is just chaos. Right? We want to go to Tai Chi class and day one say, I don't want to do it like that. It doesn't resonate with me. I want to do it my own way. This is Wu Wei. But Wu Wei is not a sloppy blob. The path of least resistance is not sloppy mess that runs from every obstacle. Right? When you first start going to dance class and the teacher has you thousands of times lift your legs just so, it may feel in the beginning like this is a constriction on your freedom of expression and creativity and infinity and Wu Wei. But they asked Pavlovna, one of the greatest ballerinas of all time, how do you perform so beautifully? And she said, as quintessential of a Wu Wei statement as any Taoist or Zen master has ever said, she said, when I'm on stage, there's no music and there's no me. There's only dance. That is a better definition of what Wu Wei is than texts written specifically about that Chinese term. And how did she get to the place where there's no music and there's no her, there's only dance? It's complete freedom. She got there through decades of form. She got there through lineage. She has a teacher who has a teacher. Because you see, at first you feel like it's constricting your freedom of movement, to discipline yourself, to raise your leg just so. But actually, within that movement of raising your leg, there's infinity. Every path is movement from the gross to the subtle. in the beginning, when you first start doing yoga, your teacher's happy that you can get into something that resembles an asana. Over time, you start micro adjusting and subtle, 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 subtle. And as you move from the gross to the subtle, you realize that within that leg raising, there's infinite variety. What do you do with your hand? Where do you go next? Do you pirouette? So on and so on. And actually, that training is empowering her body to give her the freedom to, on stage, respond to any music. No matter what the music is, no matter what the rhythm, the beat, the melody, slow music, fast music, her body through training is empowered to respond to it freely. Right? So the path of least resistance isn't an untrained state. Not for a human being anyway. That, there is a truth in the sense that, like, the drunk person falling off the cart, as they say, doesn't get hurt because they don't resist any of the falls. Or the nature, as I said, doesn't have intention, so it perfects itself because it doesn't have an intention. It's just allowing things slowly over time to find their way and their place. But for the human being, we have to intentionally connect to that. We have to learn to connect the mind to that stillness, out of which that type of action ensues. And so these things are not really mutually exclusive, right? Choosing the easy road. What I was talking about last week, choosing the easy road, is about choosing comfort, about running from obstacles, about trying to avoid obstacles, right? Which just hits another obstacle, and then you just try to avoid that and hit it. You don't really get anywhere, do you? There's no path that's not fraught with tremendous amount of obstacles. And Wu Wei is more of a heart, mind, and so approach, and also and actions that are a response to challenges and ease. So times of challenge, times of ease, both are handled with ease. Both are handled with ease. Right? So the water is not afraid of the rocks. It's not a mess. It just knows how to go through, around, under, over. It knows how to find its way. And it's stronger for the journey. So water can be hard. Water can be soft. It knows how to be both. It knows how to be the creative and the receptive. It knows how to move in both ways. So the path of least resistance, Wu Wei, is not the like floppy, messy, hippie kind of approach. I hope that helps clear that up. It's a very subtle point. It's difficult for me to put into words, but I think that is a common thing. I see it in a lot of tea. What a lot of Western people call Gong Fu tea doesn't actually have any Gong Fu, because Gong Fu means mastery through self-discipline. Gong Fu means mastery. And there's no mastery of anything without discipline. And yet, the more you master something, the more you let go. And so the more it is free. But the beginner wants to assume that that freedom is available without the cultivation that it takes to get to that area. So they think the answer is just slopping things around. And it may look like the person of skill is just slopping things around. Anytime you look at any skill, be it like tea farming, you look at the way they shake the leaves, and they're just like, oh, they got a cigarette in their mouth, and it looks like blah, 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 so easy. But then you do it, and you realize that the reason it looks so easy is because they've been doing it for 40 years every day, over and over and over and over again. They've mastered it. And so that ease came through lots of practice.
Two similar questions, one from Instagram and the other one in the chat. What is the Zen view on emotions, and how can we fine-tune them through meditation. And then David asks, how does one sit with feelings rather than thinking about them?
Sit with, yeah, I mean, there's the questions about like what to do with emotions from a Zen perspective. If there's nothing to do with them, feeling is a part of being alive. And there's no real answer to that. Some feelings are important, like grief, love, and there's there's emotions that are important and need to be given space. They're in that arena of the Tao. So I would say cutting grief is a way of also flooding the arena of the Tao. When it's time to grieve, that's a very important time for a cultivated person. Has to give room for grief. That's a part of that nature arena, that wild arena that we shouldn't mess with. When people are grieving, they're literally wild. They pull out their hair, they scream, they drink, they fall down in the road. And we don't like that in society, which is why we try to cage grief, which isn't good for the individual or the society. Actually, in traditional societies, they have professional grievers whose job is to come over like when somebody dies, and they're really good at getting everybody crying, getting everybody wailing and crying. So all the people who are trying to bottle it can't when these people come over, because they're real good at like getting everybody upset. And then everybody gets screams, and it's very important. So some emotions are like that, and other emotions we need to learn to observe. I find there's a 3-minute rule. We were just talking about this yesterday in our tea class. The 3-minute rule, which is basically like no matter how strong your craving or impulse, if you can sit objectively and observe it, follow your breath, indirectly follow the sensations in your body because they're linked to your emotions. So when you're afraid, your heart starts beating, you get palpitations, whatever, the body changes. You can observe the body, observe the hands, observe the breath. The breath will change whatever emotion you have. But if you have some strong craving, I gotta have that thing. I want one, or whatever it is, whatever emotion, guilt, whatever it is. If you can objectively watch it for about 3 minutes, it goes away. So they arise and pass away, and the idea is not to interfere with them. And we practice this through meditation, through zazen, right? Zazen isn't about doing anything. It's just sitting and being. So it's not even sitting at a distance. It's being the stream as opposed to being any of the eddies or bubbles in the stream, which ordinarily the little bubbles and eddies in the stream consume us, and we unfortunately fall so strongly into that eddy that eddy becomes the whole world, and we mistakenly think we are that eddy of anger, of a particular way of thinking, when actually we are the stream. And so in Zazen we learn to be the stream. Just let the stream go. And then emotions, you learn to, have some space around them. So they're not so influential. But emotion, But emotion is a very big word, and there are other emotions that I think are primal, they're important. Like even fear we were just talking about. I spoke about this in one of our earlier, I think our first broadcast over at the office, the first weekly broadcast we did, right? That there's two kinds of fear. There's a fear which is a response to clear and present danger, or the perception of clear and present danger. That's very important. That comes all the way from our very distant primate ancestors who first came down from the trees, and then you're in the savanna grass, and if the grass moves, you go back up the tree. And it's actually intelligent to go back up the tree whether the grass is moving because it's just the wind or a lion. It doesn't matter. You go back up the tree in both instances. I gave the example of that a lot of Zen teachers give, which is, you're walking down the street late at night and a bunch of noisy dudes are coming. You maybe go to the other side of the street. It might turn out they're just happy their football team won. But it's still intelligent to go to the other side of the street. This type of fear is primal. This is part of the arena of the Tao, part of the wild space that should be left wild. And responding to that is healthy, intelligent, important, right? So the idea of meditation is not to numb out the deep primal instincts that are guiding us to avoid situations of great harm. Like, and a bunch of angry dudes, and it's midnight, and I'm walking down the street in Barcelona, and I'm like, I'm a zenny. There's some fear, I don't care. No, I go to the other side of the street. I don't want to lose that response. But there's another type of fear, which is mind-made fear, the type of fear that floods the arena of the Tao, which is essentially, to define it in words, the mind-made type of fear is scheming and plotting to achieve specific results, which is what I was talking about earlier last week when I was talking about the easy way, which someone today in their question, they slightly confused with, they thinking that's a contradiction in terms of like the path of least resistance, but they're actually really talking about two different things. But that's what I meant by the easy way is like plotting and scheming to avoid uncomfortable situations and only have comfortable situations. Plotting and scheming to get specific results. This is our encroachment, our fighting nature. Yeah? If you want more examples of what we were talking about earlier today, about fighting nature, there's tons. Like, when a wolf comes and eats a sheep that belongs to a shepherd, he sees the sheep as his property, as an extension of himself, as my sheep, and the wolf is a problem. And so the answer is aggressive. It's that encroachment on nature. You kill it. You kill that wolf. That wolf is a problem. Kill it. Get rid of it. All problems are things to get rid of in the Western modern mindset. Right? We fight fire. But actually fire is a natural, some of fire is caused by some environmental changes that shouldn't be happening right now, and so there's too much of them. But in general, like I used to go to Mexico as a kid, and the parts of the half desert, the plants would they suck all the nutrients, and they nothing left alive but them. And as they do that, they become more waxy and more oily, all the cactus and things, and succulents, they get more waxy and oily, and then eventually lightning comes and that whole area burns, the choro, and then boom, in the next year or two, thousands of species, way more species come, because those things were hoarding all the nutrients and it was time to clear and make way for new things, right? But we don't like transformation. So that plotting and scheming is a fear of change. Right? It's a fear of change, and that's not the same as that natural emotion of fear that's part of the arena of the Tao. So our aim in meditation is not to cut that first one, but to learn to, and not even really to cut the second one, but just learn to observe it and say clever mind, there you are, trying to plot and scheme, trying to avoid change, trying to avoid transformation, and calling this type of transformation good and this type bad. That's what I was talking about when I meant those voices looking for the easy way. That's a flooding of the arena of the Tao. That's the antithesis of Wu Wei. It's not allowing nature to work itself out. It's not allowing the challenges to do their work on us, which is really the path of least resistance, the path that allows the suffering to do its work on us, and then the suffering is medicine. So we fight the wolf. But in nature, the wolf is not a problem. He's not even a problem to the sheep. He helps keep the herd at a manageable level so they themselves don't die. There's no wolves where I grew up, and so there's problems with overpopulation of deer. And you can see some years, a lot of deer come to my parents' yard, and you can see that some years the whole generation is going to die. You can see there's too many of them, and you can see that literally the entire generation of young ones isn't going to survive the winter because there's not enough food for all of them. And so the wolf was keeping their herd at a manageable level so that they would all survive. Not only that, the wolf actually only consumes about 30 or 40% of the carcass of the deer. What happens to the other 70%? The other 70% is consumed by other organisms that depend upon the wolf to kill that deer and then only eat 30% so that they can come and finish it off. So hundreds, if not thousands of species, especially if you include like little maggots and worms and all the little microbes and all the things that depend on that carcass to live, to those species, the wolf is not a problem, right? So that problem, aggressive problem, fight it, fix it, iron it out, straighten it, pave it. That egoic approach to life is actually synonymous with that, what I was saying, that inferior voice that's looking for the easy way. The easy way is everything's paved. It's all flushing water. There's no plants or life. It's sterile. We all live hundreds of years. Maybe we can live thousands of years. And what will we do with those thousands of years? Why will build more shopping malls and consume more and destroy more, encroach on nature more. So that like easy, the extreme of it is like the exaggerated version of it is beautifully expressed in that wonderful, one of my absolute favorite cartoons of all time, that Disney cartoon Wall-E, where all the people are obese and they all just live in these chairs that they like float around in on tracks, and they never get out of them because everything's digital and their food pops out of their chair and they eat it, right? But that is showing you that that's actually a kind of hell. We watched some other movie about some video games, Player One or something, and everybody in the world I think it's Steven Spielberg movie, and they're all in this virtual land as well. And to me, that's this kind of dystopia. Personally, if for some of you, maybe that's great. You go that direction. I don't know, but for me, that is that. So, yeah.
Mr. Thomas is asking, I find drinking tea by myself more rejuvenating and allows me to be with the tea more compared to when I share it with others, as they often want to talk or don't want to sit down for as long. However, I feel that this tendency means that I'm not working on cultivating a mind of service, something that I want to use my tea practice for. Any advice on how to balance these?
So this person's saying when I drink tea alone, everything's peaceful and easy, and when I try to serve tea to others, people often want to talk and are noisy and it's challenging. And but I feel like I'm not serving. I mean, you're touching on actually a very deep topic that forms the basis of literally the history of my faith of Buddhism, which is this balance between self-cultivation and the need to follow the Bodhisattva way and engage and be compassionate and help others in the world. And it's important not to pit these two things against each other psychologically, to not pursue drinking tea alone or pursue sharing tea, but to allow them to happen naturally. When it's time to put yourself out there, when it's time, when the man of the Tao can be of service, he's of service. And when he can't, he cultivates himself so that he's ready to be of service when the next opportunity to be of service arises. So the man of the Tao never passes by an opportunity of service. Right? There's stories in the Buddhist canon where people hear about the fact that there's a Buddha, and so they very earnestly and with lots of devotion rush to go meet the Buddha, and along the way they meet someone in need, and they pass by that person. And then when they get to the Buddha, they can't see the Buddha. There he is right there on the dais, and they can't see him. So if you fail to help somebody along the way because you're in a hurry to get to the Buddha, you can't see the Buddha when you get there, is the lesson. So never turn down an opportunity to serve. And when there's not an opportunity to serve, then there's cultivation so that you're more prepared to serve when the time comes to serve. If people at your tea ceremonies, we went over this a couple weeks ago, somebody asked this question about people, and I find people in my tea sessions are not sitting quietly. Again, my answer to that is twofold. First of all, the responsibility for the energy of the tea session, of the ceremony, and in space is the host. It's not the fault of your guests. Stop blaming them. If the space itself is aesthetically and energetically cultivated out of a mind of stillness, out of that space of cultivation that you're practicing when you're alone, if you use that stillness to design, architect, decorate your space, and if you then prepare the chashi properly and you prepare the tea out of that stillness, it will take people into stillness. So the more that it comes out of, the deeper the stillness that it comes out of, the easier it will be for people to go into stillness. So you cultivate yourself, you get deeper in stillness, and you'll be able to encourage others to go into stillness as well. That stillness is that arena of the Tao as well, as we were talking about today. Those two things are related, those two concepts. There's the space out of which Wu Wei arises. Right? It's not a formula. So that's one thing. And second thing I spoke about in relation to that is that, in the beginning of things, association is paramount. So as one is starting out on a journey, it's important that one find friends and guides, elder brothers, sisters that have walked that path a little bit longer, and other people that are also on that path. So I suggested to the other person that asked this question that, like, if one of your priorities in life is to sit in ceremonial space or meditative space, you need to have, what we call sangha, a group of people who are also interested and motivated by the same thing that you are. And that might mean spending a little less time with your old friends. It doesn't mean you have to give up those friendships. It just means that, like, it might be time to make some new associations. And I don't know the particulars of your circumstances, so that second and half of the answer to your question might not even be relevant, but it might be relevant to some other people, right? It's important that, like the typical example of this is like if you go to situations where somebody has a drug and alcohol problem and then they stop drinking because it's ruining their lives and the lives of their family, and so they're committed to living a new life. They have to stop hanging out at bars and hanging out with their old drinking buddies. Some of those drinking buddies, though, might be friends they've had since they were kids, and so they still stay in touch, but they are going to have to make some new friends that have other interests. So that's healthy and important. I don't know how relevant that is to the issue. If it's not relevant, fine, then go back to the first part of the answer, which is that, the deeper the stillness that the space is decorated out of, the deeper the stillness that the chashi is created, and the deeper the stillness that the ceremony comes out of. This is also yet another reason why Tamaim, method, is so important. Because when you follow traditional ceremonial methods, you are connecting to lineage grooves that were worn in not just long before you started practicing, but long before you were born. And this is fufu. So if you don't like fufu things, ignore what I'm about to say, but those grooves are powerful. They have their own juju. So when you start following ceremonial forms, you can think of this, if I want to say it in the most fufu language that I can, it's like casting a spell. And so when the spell, every detail has to be done properly, but when it is, it helps create the results that you're trying to get, which is that kind of jaku, that tranquility, a transcendental tranquility, which is the fourth virtue of tea. So the traditional ceremonial methods are very important also for this reason. Right? So in other words, it's not impossible to inspire deep stillness and jaku, tranquility, from randomly putting some tea together, but you're much more likely to get it when you're following a traditional recipe, right? You can think of this in terms of the analogy of bread. So Connor over here takes some random amount of flour, random amount of water, random amount of salt and yeast, and throws it in the oven for a random amount of time. Right? And Janus over here, he's like the 26th generation baker. His father's father was baker. And they have a family recipe because they own a bakery. They have a family recipe. They've literally over hundreds of years baked tens of thousands of loaves of bread. And they have a family recipe, a specific amount of flour, a specific amount of yeast, a specific amount of salt, a specific way of doing it, a specific temperature, a specific time. They might even have a sourdough culture that's been alive that whole time. Now, technically, any one of Janos's loaves might be worse than Connor's. Connor's random amount of flour and water and salt might result in a really excellent loaf of bread that is itself better than the one that Janos made following his recipe. However, over time, if we look at 100 loaves, Connor would be lucky to have that one that was even good at all. Whereas Janos will have, 95, 97, 98, 90, whatever. He will have a very strong amount of loaves, right? So if you take tea and randomly throw it together without that ceremonial method and recipe, right? Sure, you might get that jaku. Jaku is what you're talking about, tranquility. transcendental tranquility. Jaku means also like completeness. It's that feeling when you're holding a cup or a bowl of tea when like nothing's missing. The moment, there's nothing wrong with this moment. Nothing, you're not too cold, too hot. There's nothing missing in your life. Everything just is equanimous and tranquil and perfect. And tea is an aimless activity, but if it were to have an aim, that would be it. And so you're saying like your sessions with other people, that's not arising, or not arising very often. And I would say then, like Connor randomly throwing things together, you're less likely to have that arise often. Whereas when you do follow the recipe for that, which includes teachings about the heart and mind, the right approach, the right attitude and orientation, but also the right methods, when all of that's together, the approach and the intention you can think of as the right quality ingredients, the right flour from the right farms, the right type of salt, the right type of yeast culture, right? And then the method for mixing them, the amount of time they rise, the heat, the temperature of the oven, all that stuff. When all of that stuff's dialed in over time, your sessions won't have any trouble at all in creating Jaku on a consistent basis, especially if you are cultivating yourself so that along with that approach and intention and proper method, you also have access to the stillness that is inside of your heart. With those three things, you're going to be a Jaku powerhouse. You're going to be a bakery that's just churning out Jaku, and you're not going to have any difficulties having Jaku in your tea sessions. I think that's it for today. It's a really good discussion. I hope that it resulted in some good mud for your lotuses. I love you guys. Stay safe. Drink lots of tea this week, and keep at peace. And think about the areas in your life where you're flooding the arena of the Tao.